Hello, Ms. Schickel here with a Winter Wonderland watercolor tutorial. Today I'm thinking about the Northern Lights, a phenomena that happens both at the North and the South Pole when gaseous particles, fancy science words, right, with art, collide with electrically charged particles from the sun, and they create these most amazing artworks in the sky. And the colors are just so vibrant, and I think it would be amazing to get to go see these in real life. But since I can't, I'm using the photo references to inspire my landscape painting today. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen here in just a moment. But today's tools are watercolor. I have two sets that I'm going to play with. They're two different watercolor sets. So use whatever watercolor set you have. And use the brush that you have that you enjoy. I will also be using some white crayon, wax crayons, and I will be using a black Sharpie. So if you don't have black Sharpie, you could use either a black crayon or a black colored pencil would work too, right? So if you are using the Sharpie, you want to make sure you grab a piece of scrap paper that you can put underneath your paper so you protect your workspace. The Sharpie does bleed through, and I didn't get that, so here's me grabbing some extra paper so I have a scrap paper underneath. All right. The other tool that I will be using is salt. So this is just a little salt packet. You don't need a lot. This is maybe a teaspoon, half teaspoon of salt. So just a tiny pinch of salt. All right. And then I have my water cup half full and a paper towel for cleaning spills and brushes and drips and even a little bit of mark making. So let's go ahead and turn our camera down, and I have my photos up here, just sort of reminders. And what I want to do first is think about, in a landscape, foreground, middle ground, background, and sky. And one of the things that helps to make a landscape drawing a little more dramatic and dynamic is to have that sense of depth and distance. So when I think about the horizon line, and the horizon line here where the ground in the distance is meeting, in quotes, right, the sky, or here where we have this silhouette happening in the background of the mountains, and then here too, this ridge that's behind, whether that's a building or trees in the distance, doesn't really matter as much as we get this sense of space. And then same here, this looks like a tree line way in the distance behind the dog sled. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the silhouette in my distance, and I'm going to go, no, actually, I'm going to pause for just a moment, because I'm now thinking, if I start with that and I want to do some overlapping, and I want to put the dog sled team or the telescope or an igloo or a little village in the front, I won't be able to do that if I draw the back first, because then I won't have overlapping. So, artist's process, right? We pause, we revise, and think. So here's where I'm going to grab my pencil, because I think I do want to have, I love this idea of this planetarium, but I also have seen photographs and love the idea. I would someday love to go and spend a couple nights in an igloo under the Northern Lights. So I'm going to do an igloo shape here. And I'm going to sketch it really lightly because I want to do with the watercolor, and I want to play with my wax crayon too. So, and I am working a little bit from imagination here because I've not actually been in one. So I have to use that imagination based on what I've seen and what I know about it. All right. So clearly, if I were doing a scientific artwork and I wanted it to be historically accurate, I would do more research. All right. So I feel better about that. And then I guess I have this vision of trees with it, so I'm going to put a couple trees here. Okay, that helps me get sort of some perspective myself. And then I really want it to be about the land, so I'm going to bring that horizon line down, or not the land, about the northern lights. So let's bring that down. Okay. Edit and revise. We change our minds, right? I'm going to put some small trees out, medium trees out here, and then I'm going to put that tree line in the distance. Okay, so I feel better about that now that I've got my sense of space. And I would expect that my igloo would be white, so I'm going to just use my crayon for some wax resist here. And I'm going to go in different directions. And again, might not be architecturally correct, but I want to play with the idea of. Okay. So now I'm thinking about the snow, and I'm noticing that the snow in these pictures reflects the light that is up in the sky. So I don't need to do a lot of white actually in my snow, even though I know it's going to be snow. I want to have a little bit of a sense of snow, so I am going to do with the wax crayon just some marks in here to feel snow-ish, so that maybe the light reflects in different ways, and in some ways, some places there's going to be white reflected, and in some places there will be color reflecting. All right, now the black I'm going to use for my silhouettes in the background. And I'm using the Sharpie because I want to have something that's not going to bleed. The marker magic is really fun, but when I want it to be solid and stay in a certain shape, I need to make sure that my marker isn't going to bleed. And I'm using more solid marks for these farther away forms in the silhouette, in the background, in the skyline, right? And then the trees that I want to make look like evergreens, I'm going to, when they get closer, give a little bit more detail to. I'm not going to do lots of detail in them because, again, this is about the northern lights and the effects. So okay, I feel like it could have a little bit more something here, but I think that's probably good. And then, so I love all these little star marks that are out in the sky. They're like stippling little tiny dots. So I'm going to just use my crayon and add some wax resist to the sky. I want to be careful that I'm not too woodpeckery when I'm doing this because I don't want to break my crayon. So, and I'm trying to make dots, not dashes. So, all right. So I've got a good sense of that. And I'm just going to wipe all my crumbles away. All right. So now any brush is going to work. It might take a little bit longer if you have a smaller brush. Larger brushes are going to go a little bit faster, right? Because you can cover more space and they hold more water. But any kind of brush will work just fine. So gently swirling the water. And then depending on how thirsty your paint is how much you need. Now, man, I love the purple. Purple is just my thing, so I think I'm going to go with doing lots of layers of purple. So depending on your paper, it's going to respond differently to the water and the watercolor. So I am just putting water on the paper here. No paint in it yet. Not too much, but enough that it's sort of shiny. And then I'm going to go get some paint. Swirling gently. Remember, I don't want the metal ferrule of the brush to touch. Now, wherever I have the water, I'm just sort of going to, I want to call it dab, but I'm putting the water down and letting, or the paint down into the water and letting it move around in the water. And if it's wet, I can play and I can tip it and it will start to drip. And you can see the paint starting to get thicker here along this edge, right? So I can move it around a little bit. And it's going to want to follow where there is water on the paper already. Ooh, and then I shook a little bit more and it drips that way. All right. So I have two different purples because I've got these two different sets. So I'm going to sort of play between the two of them. And, so now with my second layer, I'm going to add just a layer of water here above. I can come right up to that edge, or I can leave a little bit of space. And again, with the watercolor, I want it to be translucent. And I'm just sort of dabbing the paint into the wet spaces on the paper. Okay. And I'm going to let them bleed into each other if they want. Tip it back this way. Ooh, getting more drips. Go this way for a minute. Back this way. Okay. So I don't really want to have puddles, but I want enough water that it's going to move around a little bit. And that's a sort of, again, you know, this is a little bit of science. So now I love this wavy effect that happens in here. So instead of doing the whole stripe of color, I'm just going to make a sort of wavy zigzag with my color. And I'm going to drop some paint into it and see how it goes. This is, watercoloring is a little bit of a science, right? You're learning how to make your brush move. You're learning how to figure out the proportions of water to paint, the right amount of water, the right amount of paint. I'm just going to move that around a little bit. Ooh, get to the corner. I got little bit of drip. This is where that paper underneath, ooh, look at that drip into there. That's exciting. Okay. And I'm playing with all of these cool colors, the purple and the blue, and I might do a little tiny bit of green. And I'm just going to dip a little bit of this other blue into this first blue here. And then, you know, this one here, this one's fun with color experimenting because it's got the green and the purple, which don't really go together, but they go together, right? So I'm going to do a spot up here that's not touching any paint that's already on my paper. And I'm going to play with that as my highlight of green. Now wherever I had those little wax dots, wherever that was that I did the stars, the paint is now not sticking to those spaces. So now here you can see I didn't put the water in first, and you can see how it's reacting differently to the paper, right? I have to direct the paint now. When I get up towards the very top, it gets really, really dark, and I really want to go into a dark purple. I might add a tiny, tiny bit of black to it, but I don't want to add too much black because black paint, there's something about the way the pigments work. Black paint, instead of looking dark, sometimes looks flat, and you lose some of your depth. So it doesn't make your painting look deeper and darker. So I often use more layers of purple when I want it to look darker, and tiny bits of black. So I'm just gonna play in here and push some colors around. And just gently tickle the page. Now, there's still wet paint here. And I'm going to take my salt, because I think I'm done playing, or I'm close to done. Close, right? I'm just going to play, because red and blue make purple. I can just add a little bit of red into some of this. Get a red violet down at the bottom. That's kind of fun. And just add a tiny bit more purple to this, so it's a little bit more wet. And I want to limit where I'm putting the salt. I'm not going to put it everywhere. So I think I'm just going to put a little stripe of salt, like a river of salt, so it's like a river of stars. And I'm just going to gently and lightly sprinkle. Now, if you don't have it in a packet like this, then you want to just pinch it between your fingers, right? Now, the trick to this is, once I've put the salt on here, I don't want to put any more paint in the sky. I want to be finished with the sky, okay? Because I want the salt to dry, and it's going to take a little while for this to dry. We'll find out if it's dry by the time I'm done with the foreground down here. So I am going to do this reflection on the snow, and I want it to be lighter than the sky. And I'm going to make sort of a mirror image. So I'm doing some striping of purple, and then this blue space here will come this direction. This green will be here, and then I'll have the dark purple corner and the dark purple corner. So it's sort of like a mirror, right? Reflecting. So, and I want it to be lighter if possible. And I'm just gonna add. So the idea with the salt, to go back there for a moment, is that I want the salt to dry. And when it dries, I'm going to take my paper towel and very, very gently, because I don't want to rip a hole in anything, right? Very gently, I will begin to rub the salt off. If the water is still wet, the salt is not going to want to come off, and it'll take all that effect that I was trying to get away. I won't be able to see it. So what happens is, wherever the salt is on here, as it dries, the color gets sucked into the salt, and then when it dries and I wipe the salt off, it will start to make this speckled effect. And I can see that it's starting to dry in a couple spots, and I'm starting to see it happen, which is really exciting. So I'm going to stay focused on these colors, so I'm not tempted to do anything silly like touch it before it's dry. Because it's exciting, and you're like, oh, I want to touch it. Now, I'm not moving the paper around as much to do the snow and the reflection, because I want that to look a little bit different from the sky, right? I want to know that this is ground and sky. I want to see the difference. And if I move it around exactly the same as I did the sky, I'll lose a little bit of that difference. So. I do want to feel like the colors are sort of coming together with each other, though. So I do want to make sure I put the water on the paper to get it to sort of move around. Get a little bit of this in there. So they sort of blend and mix into each other. Now this was a sort of dark blue purple up here in the corner. And this is where, as an artist, you get to just sort of play and have fun with the colors. Right, because this is, well, it's a scientific event. The scientific event is not a formula, right? We're not going to reproduce it in the exact same colors every time. No northern lights are going to be the same. Oops, that's a little too wet, too dark. Bring that down. And then I have to decide how I want to make this igloo look like it is having some color reflected. And I think I'm just going to dip my brush in the water. And at this point, my water has color in it, right? Because I've been rinsing my brush. And so I'm just going to use a little bit of that colored water. Now, to help push it forward, I do need it to be, my snow to be a little bit darker than the igloo. So I have to come back in with some water. And I'm just going to use little bits at a time. Watercolor is also about layering. Let it dry, look at it and add more color. Let it dry. And this paint is drying pretty fast. And then I want it to look like there's like light or a warm glow outside the outside of, from inside the igloo. So I'm going to go in with my yellow, even though I thought I was going to do the door to the igloo as like a dark, I'm just going to give it a little bit of yellow, because I know that if an igloo is designed correctly, you should be able to have a small amount of, a fire and a warming system inside of it, right? And I'm also going to give this side a little bit of shadow. And I'm going to shadow with the blue. So I'm going to make this a little bit darker, and I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm just going to sort of come up like that. And I'm going to come up on there. And I just rinsed my brush out a little bit, and now I'm blending so that I get some value, so that it goes from dark to light. Because I want it a little darker over there, and that'll help make it look a little round. Don't get too close to the yellow there, that's leaking out. So I feel like I'd like these, now that I'm seeing this with color, that I'd like these trees to be darker. And I'm going to have to wait until the paint dries to go back with the marker and make these a little bit more solid. Maybe not, definitely not as solid as the mountains here, but I think I want it to be closer to this darkness, just because right now they feel like they don't feel very 3D, and maybe I need to go in another direction with them as well. So play with your silhouettes and how dark or light they need to be. Sometimes when your paint leaks, you can wipe your brush off or just press it down on your paper towel, and then it'll pick up the paint and you can move it back where you want it to go. All right. So I am really tempted to test out if the paint under the salt is dry. But hopefully you can see here where I sprinkled the salt. I don't think it is. It's still got a little bit of shiny to it. In all these spaces here where I sprinkled the salt, you can see it looked like little crystals, like little stars or snowflakes. So I'm going to be strong, and I'm not going to wipe this off right now, but that's going to be part of the magic that you'll experience when you wipe your salt off. I'm going to say I'm going to leave this until at least 2 hours to make sure that it's good and dry, even though it's tempting. All right. Happy Winter Wonderland creating. Be creative with what you put in here. I used the igloo and the trees, but you might go with the planetarium or a dog sled team. You might add some polar bears. You might add a little village. There are other Arctic animals. There are also Antarctic animals. So if you're doing the southern lights in Antarctica, you might have penguins. And if you're doing the northern lights, you're going to have our polar bears and our igloos. So if you want to head south and have some penguins, you could have them in the picture too. So be creative and enjoy the way watercolors can create the effect of the northern and southern lights. Happy creating!